You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Katherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with Stefania Sechia, who's the communication advisor to the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, about the state of homelessness in Canada. First, today's news headlines. 2020 had the greatest decline in births compared to 2019. According to Statistics Canada, the greatest decline in birth rates took place in 2020 compared to 2019. There was a decrease of 3.6% compared to 2019, and the lowest it has been since 2006. Economic factors like daycare and job loss, along with other social factors, are likely one of the reasons families delay having children. In addition, the decrease in immigration due to travel restrictions over COVID could be a reason for fewer births for newcomer parents. Non-hospital births were at a high in 2020, even though the overall birth numbers were lower. Halifax to set up emergency housing for the homeless. Halifax City Hall will be building over 100 housing spaces to solve the ongoing housing crisis. The initiative will use the $20 million from the federal government's Rapid Housing Initiative program. The municipality is working on securing spots and renovating to create facilities like washrooms, laundry, kitchen, and sleep areas. According to Halifax Today, almost 400 people are homeless as of Wednesday. The high rate continues to climb as landlords evict their tenants. Residential school survivor finds brother's grave after 58 years. Elizabeth Beardy finally finds her brother's unmarked grave in Manitoba after almost 60 years of searching. Beardy last saw her baby brother, Isaias Harper, in 1955, right before she was forcibly taken to the Norway House Residential School. According to the CBC, she was flown from her home in Garden Hill First Nation to the school. The journey in the aeroplane, she recalls, was rough, with the children being packed like a bunch of sardines. Eventually, Beardy found out that her brother had died while she was in school. The family suspected his death was due to tuberculosis. Ironically, his grave was found near her home in Winnipeg. The unmarked grave was found 1 week before news of the mass unmarked graves in Kamloops, British Columbia was revealed. Anti-Muslim campaign strengthens under Macron's France. France is continuing its move towards greater restrictions on the free speech of the country's Muslims. Authorities have frozen the assets of two publishers, NAWA and the Black African Defence League. They have also detained the managers of the companies. No judicial process was followed for these steps. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin is leading the effort to implement President Emmanuel Macron's agenda. Darmanin described the two publishers as contrary to Western values and having separatist tendencies. In contrast, Macron has previously said that he will not prevent the release of insulting cartoons of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This is under the pretext of freedom of expression, a statement that sparked outrage in the Arab and Muslim world last year. That's it for the news. And now our interview with Stefania Sechia. With us today, Stefania Sechia, Communications Advisor from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, to talk about the campaign to end homelessness in Canada. Welcome to the show, Stefania.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, a lot of Muslims come from countries where there's widespread abject poverty and widespread visible homelessness, and there's a sense that there isn't really poverty in Canada. So can you tell us about what the state of homelessness in Canada is?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great question because Canada is seen as and is such a wealthy nation. And I think what many people don't know, especially if you're newer to the country or were born after the 80s, is that modern mass homelessness that we see today, the state of the number of people we see living unsheltered on the streets, didn't exist before then. we didn't see it at this level, in this scope, at this scale. I think right now we estimate that there are about 235,000 people a year who experience homelessness, and perhaps about 35,000 people on any given night experiencing it. And that is the cause of that is that stems back to the 80s and 90s, is a divestment on the federal government not investing in deeply affordable housing units like they used to, building cooperative housing across the country, things like that, supportive and social housing. When we saw that start to go, we are now in a state where 30 plus years later, we've seen this snowball effect. And that is why we now see the level of people experiencing homelessness on the streets today that we just didn't over 30 years ago.
Well, that was going to be my next question about why it's happening. I mean, it's a little bit mind-boggling that in a country as wealthy as Canada, there is homelessness. I think I heard you say that it comes from government policies. Could you just sort of elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. So, what we've realized is that policy is what got us into this situation, and it's going to be policy that can help us also get out of it. So, right now, we're dealing with a situation where we have 30 years where we weren't seeing an investment from federal government, whose jurisdiction it is to make sure housing is being built, to make sure there are policies in place to prevent homelessness, to support the work that's happening provincially and at a community level. So, when I talk about what happened 30 years ago, that was sort of the genesis of it, the beginning of it, to the scale that we see today. So what our organization does, one of its many efforts, is lobby and work with the federal government to present the solutions, to kind of present a roadmap on the very different layered actions that they can take that will help us get out of this situation, to address the need today and then work toward a future where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring, which means returning policies in place that they had in the 80s and 90s where they're investing in, for instance, a big example is deeply affordable housing.
And you mentioned the federal government as the focus of your lobbying efforts. Is housing not a provincial matter? It's a federal matter?
It's a federal matter as far as jurisdiction goes, but what we've been seeing over the last 30 years is it really falling on the shoulders or in the laps of municipalities, who are, of course, that first level frontline government, where folks who are experiencing homelessness, folks who aren't experiencing homelessness, often complain to municipal governments. There are zoning issues that fall under municipal jurisdiction where they can, if they're given funding to build housing, finding it within their community, making sure those projects come to light. So it is a focus of the federal government, but there is also a really critical importance that at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels, there's alignment and they're working together towards the same goal and using the same steps to get there, which is something else that we work on. So we work with the federal government, but we also work with provincial and municipal communities across Canada too.
Well, during the pandemic, I believe homelessness has gotten worse and there have been tent cities springing up. We witnessed the horrific scenes of the Toronto police going through and clearing out people from a tent city. Where are these people supposed to go?
That is a $1 million question, I think. I think there's still this stigma and stereotyping of people experiencing homelessness, like they've made some kind of choice. So what COVID-19 did was land another emergency on an already emergency situation. Shelters were overcrowded across Canada. People were already trying to respond to the crisis on the street. And then COVID-19 complicated everything. And when we heard the rallying cry be stay home to stay safe, people experiencing homelessness didn't have that basic necessity in order to do that. So the response in kind was, shelters, working and buying up motels and hotel space so people can isolate. What COVID-19 showed us was governments can move quickly when they want to. They can make funding available very, very quickly. And what we actually saw as a silver lining was many communities taking this opportunity in COVID-19 to cut that red tape, use that funding to become housing focused. So not just responding to the emergency at hand, but actually strategizing and mobilizing their networks to get people housed. So COVID-19 was this double-edged sword where we definitely saw more pressure on the system, but the system in many places actually used it as an opportunity to end homelessness or work toward ending homelessness.
So you mentioned that you've been doing lobbying at all three levels. We've just come out of the federal election campaign. How did you feel that this issue was tackled by the parties during the debate?
Yeah, so my organization was part of, came together with other organizations across Canada, like the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, the CHRA, and others. And we did the Vote Housing campaign. And, we kind of guessed when the writ would drop. We had a feeling it would be around August 16th, which is, as we know, is when it happened. And our goal was to make housing and homelessness top issues in the election. And in the first few days, we were not encouraged by what we were hearing. Politicians talk about, leaders of the parties talk about. But by the end of that first week, through efforts from Vote Housing and others like us, suddenly you started hearing housing come up more and more. And we were really happy to see that issue continue on throughout the election. We felt fairly consistently, so that we actually started to see parties scramble with their platforms to address it, to show that their finger was on the pulse with what was one of the biggest issues that I don't think they expected to become one of the biggest issues. I think they were expecting the pandemic, recovery out of the pandemic, climate change, which were issues too. But housing is definitely embedded in all of these crises that we see in Canada right now. So I would say we were glad, but there's still a lot of work left for us to do to make sure it continues to be addressed now that government is starting to form again in the next month.
I mean, housing should be a basic human right. It's a matter of the survival at the most basic level. So we really commend you for all the work you've been doing, and cross our fingers and pray that people recognize this as a human right and put their minds to fixing the policies that you identified. Thank you for coming on the show to talk to us about your campaign to end homelessness from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Stefania Secchia, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it from us. You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay safe. God bless.